You're listening to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options to aging on your terms.
When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
And welcome to Aging Today. I'm your host, Mark Turnbull, and we are delighted that you chose to join us today. We're the podcast where together we do explore the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our 4 years of past programs on our website. All you got to do is go to the internet, type in www.agingtoday.us, and you can pick up any of our past programs. You can also follow us on any of your favorite podcast channels, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, and many, many others. And then finally, we want to hear from you. And you are the listeners. You are the reason why we're on the air. And we want to make sure that we're addressing all the questions that you have. And then if you know of somebody that is an expert on the aging process, doesn't matter what form of aging process that it's in, we want to hear from you. All you got to do is contact me, your host, Mark Turnbull, at mark@agingtoday.us. That is Mark with a K, mark@agingtoday.us. We would love to hear from you. I'm inspired by all of your questions and the many guests that you bring to our attention. So welcome again to Aging Today. Well, at the center of everything that we do here is caregivers, caregiving. Caregivers and caregiving go hand in hand, and it takes a very special person to be a caregiver. And most of us are going to be and have performed caregiving at some point of our lives. And if you have a spouse that is in need of care or children that are in need of care, even if they're staying home from school for the day, I guess you've done caregiving. So we're all doing caregiving, but I want to address that, what I call the 1%. Those caregivers that do this on a professional basis, or those caregivers that are family members that are taking care of one of their family members living with a long-term chronic disease of some kind. Those caregivers, there's about 1% that can actually do that. And think about that. They're very special people, and they have very special attributes. And there are very special people that are recognizing those caregivers out there, and that is who is our guest today. Her name is Elaine Sanchez. You probably recognize that name. She's been a guest of ours in the past, and she's doing some very, very special things for caregivers and keeping them healthy, keeping them inspired, recognizing caregivers, and that is Elaine Sanchez. Elaine, welcome to Aging Today.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that introduction, and you are so right. This is incredibly difficult. I believe that caregiving is one of the most difficult and generous acts of love any of us will ever perform on behalf of another person. And we need to be supporting people who do this with everything we can possibly create, offer, and give them to support them, because it is tremendously difficult.
It really is. And like I said, the true caregivers out there, yeah, we all have that slice where we can care for one another. I get that. But I'm talking about day to day, going into a complete stranger's home and caring for an individual at whatever stage of life or whatever stage of illness that they're living with, and all the personal care tasks that are involved with that. It is a very intimate career, if you will, because you're bathing, you're toileting, you're dressing, you're doing, things that most of us never considered would happen to us. And then all of a sudden you wake up one morning and you go, whoops, I'm suddenly a senior and I'm starting to need more and more assistance. Or like in you and I were talking earlier, in your case, and in all of our cases, we may go through some downtime in our lives where we have to have elective surgeries of various kinds. Right. And then we become immobile, or we find that, oh my goodness, I do need a little assistance. Yes,
that is for sure. And you own Comfort Care franchise, correct?
That is correct.
I thought so, and I was so excited. I want to just take a minute to give you a shout out in Comfort Care because I saw this article in a 50 Plus magazine, and the Great Place to Work Institute has honored Comfort Care with a Great Place to Work certification. Did you know this? Were you aware of it?
Yes, I was very aware of that, and it was such an honor. And to be a part of a group like that across the nation, and actually there are some Comfort Cares across the world as well.
Oh, that's so neat. And this impressed me because, we can all blow our own horns, but when your employees are saying that this is great, because the survey, as I'm reading here, covers more than 60 elements of experience on the job, including employee pride in their organization's community impact, belief that their work makes a difference, and feeling their work has special meaning. And rankings are based on employees' experiences, whatever their position or scope of work within the company. So also, I thought it was really awesome that you are teaching employees how to manage fall risks, dementia behaviors, Parkinson's disease, identifying red flags of strokes, diabetes, and more. That is really a tremendous honor, and I'm just proud to know you.
Yeah, well, and this wasn't even, we didn't even pre-talk about this. You just brought this up out of the blue, so I want our listening. This is not a paid program, okay?
It is not a paid program. Actually, a friend of mine sent me, and there was an article on the front about a new magazine that serves those with dementia and cognitive impairment, and it's called Mirador, and they are writing articles that are appropriate for people who have dementia, because it's large type, it's not too much information, short stories with a lot of pictures. And I thought, that is so cool. And when I folded it and turned it over, then I saw this about Comfort Care, and I thought, well, I'm just going to have to toot your horn and help you celebrate this. This is a neat thing.
It really is. And, we devote a lot of time and energy. And we say in our Comfort Care West Lynn office that the two most important people are the caregiver, and it begins with the caregiver and the client, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you and I were brought up in an era where the client was always right. The client is always first. And we've taken a slightly different approach. We call it caregiver first. And it doesn't mean that we diminish our clients at all, but we do care for we become the caregivers to our caregivers. And
that's important. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time recognizing them, lifting them up, equipping them to do the work of the very difficult work of a caregiver. And when we take that approach, we find that our caregivers are healthier, they last longer, so that they can take care of the most important people in that room at the time, and which is the client.
Exactly. Yeah. And I often say, to family caregivers that feel guilty about getting respite care or bringing somebody in, I'll say, well, okay, imagine you run an ad in the newspaper and it says caregiver wanted, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no time off, no pay, no vacation, no benefits. How many people do you think would apply?
Yeah.
You know, this is not a one-person job. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
and what a great transition for you and what you are doing, because you are a very special woman that has seen that there's a huge need out there to recognize caregivers. And I want you to tell your story and how it got started. How did you get started into recognizing caregivers? And you're an author, you're a speaker, and you're doing something very special right now that we're going to launch into. But let's lay the foundation.
Okay, so it was October 30th, 1993, so that's quite a while ago. My dad suffered a really debilitating stroke, and my parents lived on a farm in Kansas, and my mother was in very poor health, and they had limited cash resources. She was losing her hearing, and at that time there were not affordable telephone plans. Like, are you old enough to remember that you had, the prices were lower to call after 5 p.m.,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
all of those things. So since hearing was an issue for her and she was isolated, one of the ways that she managed her stress was to disengage her emotional monitor, and she would just write letters to me. And she talked about everything that was going on, and she did not sugarcoat anything. She talked about how she felt about it. But here's the interesting thing about my mother is that she was always looking for a way to control her thinking toward difficult circumstances. And I thought her letters were magnificent. I saved them. I ended up publishing them. I edited them into a book, and I published the first edition in 2007. And I started speaking shortly after that. And I think it was 2010. I was on my way home from a speaking engagement on the airplane, and a man sitting next to me turned to me and he said, so if, he wanted to know what I did. And I told him, he said, okay, so if I went to your website in the middle of the night and I was absolutely desperate for some information that would help me get through the night, would I find it there? And I was like, oh, no. I felt like I had just been gut punched. And I said, no, you wouldn't. Everything you would find there is about my book and about my speaking. There is not anything there for caregivers. So I came home and I told my husband, who had also been a caregiver. He had cared for his first wife through her terminal illness with lung cancer, and was a partner, with me taking care of my parents and all of that. So I said, you know what I want to do? I want to create a video-based program and put it on our website so that people like my mom, who are isolated and lonely and scared and confused, so that if they are having a really bad moment, that they could come to our website and they could find something that would help them laugh maybe a little bit, or give them a strategy that would help them deal with an immediate crisis. So he said, sounds like a lot of work. And I said, you know what, 6 months. 6 months, we can make this happen. Well, it took 2 years, 2 full years. And that was when we launched the first video-based program. And then in 2012, we turned it into a caregiver support group program with DVDs. And then in 2018, we updated it and created some new DVDs. And now that everything has gone to streaming, this is one of the good outcomes of COVID, is that people have become comfortable with doing Zoom and watching virtual presentations and meeting virtually. So I've been doing support groups for a number of groups for the last several years. I did several years with Aetna, and then with Aetna and CVS, and then with some area agencies on aging. And I just decided, I have, Mark, been able to reach hundreds of people through speaking at conferences, maybe, thousands even, but I've missed millions because there are 48 million unpaid family caregivers out there. And I think most of them struggle with dealing with anger, guilt, depression, grief, dementia-related challenging behaviors, and finding ways to take care of themselves. So we are in the process of launching this new program that I think does just that.
And then the target audience of the type of caregiver that would benefit most from this is who? Are these private caregivers or caregivers, that are family members taking care of their loved one, or is it both where there's professional caregivers involved as well?
Yes, it can be both. At this point.
And explain to our listening audience, for those that are not familiar with the many different types of caregivers, when we use that word caregiver, it's often interchangeable. A spouse is a caregiver.
Right.
Children.
A child.
Yep.
Right. So it's really anyone who is helping provide care. So if you are going out and buying groceries, if you're taking somebody to a doctor's appointment, if you are concerned about them and constantly checking on them, then you're a caregiver. And of course, there are all sorts of levels. There are people who help out. I was a long distance caregiver, for many years. I've been a hands-on caregiver with my husband when he's had a couple of spinal fusions. We were supportive caregivers for my aunt, who actually lived independently, but, we were always involved with her care and well-being for about 10 years. And so, it is the gambit, but this program is really developed for people who are in the trenches, who experience what I call the 3 F's of flipping out, fear, frustration, fatigue. And it all is based on what my mother came to call an attitude of creative indifference. And this was one of the ways that she managed her stress, that she didn't really realize that she had a system, a process, but it's a 3-step process. And anytime you come up against a situation that is causing you a great deal of stress, then we encourage people to take the first step, which is to become aware by sitting down and writing about it. Whatever the person, the situation, or the event is, just like Madeline, disengage that emotional monitor and just write about it. What are, all of the contributing factors? The second step is acceptance. And this is the hardest piece, because if we're caring for somebody who has a progressive and degenerative disease such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, we have to accept that what we had is in the past. What we had hoped for at this present time is not going to be our reality. And what we had planned for the future is going to be very different from what our future is. So this is the hard part, and that it's accepting that there are some things that are beyond your control. And then the third step
and that's got to be very difficult for most of us, right? Because we grow up, or we have all grown up in a culture where we've all been able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and you can do almost anything you want. But then when you find yourself in a place where you don't have that power anymore. That's got to be frustrating.
It's horrible. Yeah. And, we think that there should be a cure for every disease and a solution to every problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what makes acceptance hard. And it takes us to the third step, which is action. And I say there are two parts to this. The first part is to determine, is this a problem that has a solution? And if it is, that's awesome, because you can make a plan, you can execute the plan, and you can move on. But more often than not, what you are dealing with as a caregiver are problems for which there are no solutions. So then it comes down to, okay, how do you handle these things? Do you choose to release your emotional attachment to them? Or do you allow them to occupy your mind throughout the day and wake you up every morning at 3 a.m. As you obsess over them? And so that's really the foundation of the program. Mm-hmm. And then we have, I have videos, and we have discussion questions that, help people kind of identify the things that are going on with them and support them with coming up with either solutions or with strategies for managing the stress. And then we have an accompanying workbook that gives them some writing assignments to help them work through each of these issues kind of on their own time.
So in a nutshell, this is a program that is going mm-hmm. to help caregivers cope with some of the daily challenges that they're facing, mm-hmm. and giving mm-hmm. them the tools, the resources, and the connections to find solutions to some of the challenges that they're finding exactly. as a caregiver.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly.
So
yeah, you got it.
so let's take a scenario. Okay, let's take a problem.
Okay.
I'll let you pick the problem that caregivers are struggling with, and then let's apply these three, how to manage this stress. Apply these three principles to a particular problem that they're faced with.
Okay, so let's just take fatigue, for instance.
Okay.
Fatigue is what I call one of the 3 F's of flipping out. And when you're thinking about fatigue, when you aren't getting enough rest, you get tired. And there is a reason that sleep deprivation is a really wonderfully effective tool of torture, because it just works so well, right? So let's just say you look at fatigue, and then, I ask people to identify, so what is making you tired? Is it your own health? And oftentimes, with my mother, she had congestive heart failure, so of course she was tired. Are you trying to do all of this on your own? And we go through a lot of different scenarios. Okay, so what is the solution? Well, your caregiver is still going to need help. There's no question about that. So how can you either adapt your schedule so that when he or she is resting, you are resting? What kind of respite can you find for them? And I'm, as you know, I am a huge advocate for respite care, either having somebody come into the home and providing you care so that you can go out and run some errands, do some shopping, have a little pleasure, meet somebody for lunch, go to a movie, take a weekend, whatever. So I think, and I also think it's really important to try to find respite programs for the care receiver, because, think about it. Some of us got we got a taste of being isolated in our homes during COVID. And that's social isolation is not good. So, I think that we have to address getting them out, getting them involved, getting them in programs where they are with other people, and they have the opportunity to go someplace where they aren't in trouble, where everybody's happy to see them, where they can have some success doing, events and things like that. And I just think that is just really important. So you have some respite. You have an opportunity to get your care receiver into a program where they get a break, they have some success, they feel good, you get some rest. And then I think that and some different social interaction, and that gives you a reset button. So that's the way that I approach fatigue. And then, if they're napping, you nap. If they're sleeping, you sleep. Don't, give up the idea of having a perfectly clean house or a well-manicured yard. Just, let those things go and understand that you have to take care of yourself and get some rest.
Yeah. And I think that you have to give the care. Now, in my setting, being a franchise owner, and where we have over 100 caregivers going into homes, we err on the side of making sure that the caregivers are staying busy all the time. And I as I was listening to you, I'm thinking that we're contributing to some of the fatigue.
Oh, interesting. How so? Making sure they're busy. What do you mean?
Well, instead of, when the client, think about when the client is sleeping, we're not advocating that the caregivers sleep. We don't allow them to sleep in the home. But, that's the time for them to go do housekeeping. Well, if they're not doing housekeeping, then, we need to make sure that they're taking that downtime. And that's where, they could get maybe listening on some music, that would help relieve some of the fatigue for caregivers on the job.
Oh, so you're talking, okay. So I
Yeah.
was talking about family caregivers, but you know what? That makes sense too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have them there for an 8-hour shift and you expect them to be productive every single minute, you know what?
That's not possible.
They're going to get burned out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, none of us can do that.
Yeah.
None of us can do that.
And yet that's kind of the expectation of many, agencies that are providing caregivers on a professional basis. And, I just, you inspired me to to kind of rethink that,
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is important. And, if they're there for 2 hours, yes.
Yeah, a little different. A little different.
Yeah, it's a little different. But if they are there for several hours every day, they, if you're working any other job, you're going to get coffee breaks and lunch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of typical amongst agencies, your franchise agencies, if you will, where there's that expectation for the caregiver.
Yeah.
And that could be one of the reasons why there's such a high turnover rate amongst caregivers with agencies. I mean, that's one of the many factors, of course.
Yeah, and this program is also appropriate for caregivers. I have programs that that are CEU based, like for nurses and mental health professionals, but this would absolutely be appropriate for non-medical care providers. So. Yeah, it's just, we just have to understand that there is a tremendous amount of physical labor. And I always say that is dreary and it's demanding and sometimes it's just downright disgusting. But I think it pales in comparison to the emotional stress of doing this, and you always feel like no matter how much you're doing, it's never enough. It's never good enough. And I just really encourage people to let go of that idea that, and to think let's just reverse things for a minute. And, how would you feel if someone were doing for you all of the things that you are doing to take care of them? And then I think you would feel like, wow, I would really be grateful. I would really be grateful. So throughout my course, Mark, it is really a story-based program. And
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Explain that to us.
Story-based. Okay,
Yeah.
so here's the story. I don't think, did I tell you about Claudia and Claudia robbing a bank the last time we spoke?
I think so, but go ahead, and for our listeners that maybe not have heard it.
That didn't hear it. Okay.
Yeah.
So several years ago, I was speaking in Wisconsin at a conference for individuals who were taking care of family members with Huntington's and Parkinson's disease. And in the morning, I had talked about fatigue and how that contributed to caregiver anger and the importance of getting enough rest. And at lunch, I sat with this table of just really lovely women. And the woman sitting next to me was named Claudia. And she turned to me and she said, I've got a plan. And I said, okay, I want to hear it. And she said, I'm going to get my husband in the car and we're going to drive to the bank. And then I'm going to get out and I'm going to scoot him over to the driver's seat so that he'll look like my accomplice. He'll look like the getaway driver. And then I'm going to walk into the bank with an unloaded gun and I'm going to point it at the teller and I'm going to say, this is a stick up. And if she gives me any money, then I'm going to take it out to the car and I'm going to sit there in the passenger seat and wait until the police come. Now, here's the beautiful thing about that. They will arrest both of us, and then they will take my husband to the men's prison, and they will have to manage his medications. They're going to have to deal with his depends. They're going to have to manage his special diets, and they'll put me in the women's prison, and I will be in a cell all by myself. I can read during the day. I'll be able to sleep at night, and it won't cost us a dime.
That is a great story.
And so here's the thing about Claudia. I believe she was really great at using humor to help her cope with a really difficult situation. At the same time, I don't doubt for a second that I think she had really considered doing something desperate in order to get some rest. And, so I tell people, if you think that going to prison would be a better alternative than continuing to care for your person, you need to get some help. You need to get some rest. You need to get some relief. So I tell a lot of stories that I think most caregivers can identify with. One time my mother so let's talk about, this attitude of creative indifference and the 3 F's. All right. So she got so mad at my dad because she was convinced that the reason he had had a stroke is because he was still farming with my brother. He worked too hard. He wore himself out. He had a stroke. So the summer after his first stroke, they had a wheat field fire. And my dad insisted, even though putting him in anything with a clutch or a brake or accelerator was a pretty dangerous situation, he insisted on taking a tractor to the field and plowing a fire break. And he had so much fun being back on a tractor that he didn't want to stop. And he came in, they got the fire out, he came in, had dinner, stood up, grabbed his hat, and he walked to the back door. And my mother said, where do you think you're going? And he said, well, there's still a little work. I'm going to go help Larry. And she said, I am not at all proud of myself. But when he finally came dragging in last night at 9:30, I met him at the back door hollering, if you have another stroke, it had better, by God, kill you. And, it's like, okay, yes, that was a little harsh. I understand. Mm-hmm. But I said, so what Madeline was dealing with here were the 3 F's of flipping out. First of all, she was afraid. She was afraid if he had another stroke, it might kill him. And on the other hand, it might not. It might just disable him to the point that she could no longer care for him herself.
Mm-hmm.
And that would mean that she would have to sell homesteaded farm ground to pay for his care. And if it took all of the money to care for him, there might not be anything left for her. So it was fear, was her first F of flipping out. Frustrated. She knew that there were exercises he could be doing to strengthen his leg and his right arm and hand, and he refused to do them. And she also knew that he should stop driving, and he refused to do that. And that was very frustrating to her because she could not control his behavior. And then, of course, the third thing was fatigue because she had congestive heart failure. Quentin didn't sleep at night. He also had prostate cancer, so he had urinary incontinence, and it wasn't unusual for her to be up and changing wet sheets and changing him out of his Depends in the middle of the night, sometimes 2 or 3 times a night. So, she had all of these things going on, and you say, okay, can you blame her for getting angry? And the answer is no. No.
Mm-hmm.
So then what are the things that you can do in order to get control of this situation? So we talk about that.
This is Aging Today with host Mark Turnbull and his guest Elaine Sanchez. Caregiving can be very challenging at times, and Elaine offers hope and help to caregivers, encouraging them with great advice for staying healthy and inspired as they care for another human being. We'll hear more of this conversation with Mark and Elaine in just a moment.
Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow!
Oh yeah, still got those moves.
I will be fabulous.
Comfort Care can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands. Let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match so you can live your best life possible.
Call Comfort Care at 503-636-0417.
A Did You Know moment from Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn.
Did you know that 50% of unpaid family caregivers suffer from stress-related illness, including depression? Aging Today guest Elaine Sanchez will be hosting a new Caregiver Support Group program available for purchase. There will be 10 modules. Intro to Creative Indifference, Managing the 3 F's of Flipping Out, Fear, Frustration, and Fatigue, Taming Your Anger Monster, Giving Caregiver Guilt the Boot, Dealing with Caregiver Depression, Caregiver Grief, Before and After Death, Ducks in a Row, Exception Mortality, Dementia, Stress, Triggers, and Sundowning, Dementia, Individuality and Sexuality, and Self-Care is Not Selfish. Visit caregiverhelp.com. This Did You Know moment is brought to you by Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn. Call today at 503-636-0417.
And now, more of our discussion about help for caregivers with host Mark Turnbull and his guest Elaine Sanchez on Aging Today.
I think the important thing, Mark, for caregivers is to understand that they are not alone, that having negative feelings does not make them a bad person, and that if they can accept the fact that they cannot manage a lot of circumstances, but they can manage their own attitude toward certain circumstances, and they can choose their responses, that they have that control. I think it really helps relieve a lot of stress.
Let's talk a little bit about that last one.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not taking it so personally when you can't manage somebody else's behaviors. And I'm assuming that's what you're talking about or alluding to.
Of course.
There's so many other things there. And it wears you out. I mean, you especially maybe because I'm a guy and guys want to fix everything, and I want to go in there. And I think caregivers in general, they're like many guys, they're fixers.
We are fixers. Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. Give us a scenario.
Well, okay, let's talk about, you have 4 siblings, right? And you have one sibling that lives right next door to the parents. And that sibling doesn't go over to see them, doesn't offer to help, they don't contribute anything. That gets really frustrating. And so there are several things that I talk about in dealing with not being able to control other people's behavior. And, one thing that I start with is setting boundaries. You set your own boundaries. You identify what you are willing and capable of giving. And then you draw that line in the sand. And when you know that that is a line over which you will not allow other people to cross, once you establish that, they are going to be less likely to push you into doing everything that you can say, this is what I can do. This is what I'm willing to do. I'm not capable of doing that. I won't do that. I don't want to do it. I mean, I have all sorts of phrases for people to use. And then the other thing that I think is really important that is helpful is holding other people accountable for their behavior and letting them know, naming, what they did or did not do, explaining how that impacted you or your mutual care receiver, and just being honest. You don't have to be mean. I don't approve of name calling or, beating them up, but I do think it's appropriate to say, this is our mother. This is not my responsibility alone. She is a family responsibility. Each one of us needs to carry some of the load. And rather than just storming and stomping and being angry with them, then I think we hold them accountable.
And you can participate in caring for mom in a variety of ways. You don't have to.
That's exactly
you
right.
don't have to do it. My sister or my brother doesn't have to do it the way I care for mom.
That's right. That's right. I talk to people who say, "Well, I live across the country. I can't help." And I said, "Well, there are several things you can do to help. You could contribute to respite care if you are financially able to do that. You could make, frequent telephone calls. You could send cards and letters, and you could really let the person who is carrying the bulk of the load know how much they are appreciated and thank them constantly and buck them up any chance you get. And, even if you can't contribute financially and you can't be there in person, there are things you can do to make this job a little bit easier for the caregiver and to support the person who is ill or who needs the help.
So your program, CaregiverHelp.com, the training modules that you put together, address this is one of the many things that you address.
Right.
And so I'm looking at your website, and in there the module titles. Can we talk a little bit about some of those module titles? And this is what they're the specific training that a caregiver is going to receive from taking your classes. Yeah.
So I think giving caregiver guilt the boot is a really good example. And I think if you give them the tools to stop feeling guilty, that's one of the biggest.
So what are some of the things that caregivers are guilty of?
I think they often feel guilty about the way they feel. Sometimes they feel guilty for actions, for things they did or didn't do. But my experience is they often feel more guilty for the way they feel towards someone. Okay. So I address this by saying that Guilt is an appropriate response when you have intentionally inflicted physical or emotional pain on another person. And when you don't do that intentionally, then I think we have to recognize that guilt is often a very cruel and controlling emotion. And it is something that some people, I call them guilt trippers, are very adept at using to get what they want. So anger, somebody gets angry with you and they make you feel guilty for not making them happy, for not meeting all of their needs. And I talk about, here's just a quick example. How do you know if somebody is a guilt tripper? It's if something happens to you, let's say you trip and you sprain your ankle, right? Or you get in a car accident on your way home from the grocery store. Is their immediate response going to be concern for you? Or are they only going to be able to think about how this impacts them? And if they think, wow, Mark having a sprained ankle is really going to be inconvenient for me because he's not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, right? So I tell people that's a pretty good indicator. And then what you have to understand about a guilt tripper is that they will never, ever, ever, ever say, stop, take care of yourself, don't worry about me, do something, for yourself. They won't ever do that. They will keep piling it on and they will expect more and more and more. You will never, ever be able to do enough, give enough, be enough to satisfy a guilt tripper. So if you want to stop feeling guilty, then you're going to be the one that has to change. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is to change their emotional vocabulary. So guilt, it feels like shame, right? You have failed in an obligation. You are a bad person. You've done something wrong. You haven't held up your end of the bargain, whatever. You feel like it's a personal shortcoming on your part. And I ask them to switch the word guilt with the word regret. And regret is a sense of sadness or a wishing that things could be different. Okay? So then we go through an exercise and I have some little characters that I show, some animated videos. And so, for instance, I regret that I sometimes lose my temper and I say things that I wish I could take back. I regret that I resent the amount of time it takes to provide for their care. I regret that I resent the amount of money it takes, and that sometimes I think about how much something is going to cost before I think about the benefit to my care receiver. I regret that I made promises in the past that I'm not going to be able to keep. I regret that our relationship has changed. I regret that I don't want to spend time with him any longer, or that, I don't like the person she has become. And I just go through this whole series. And if I'm talking to professional caregivers, sometimes it's, I regret that, that I don't like all of our residents, or I don't like all of the people in my care. I regret that sometimes I don't like their family members. I regret that I don't have enough time to spend with my own children and my own family. I regret that I run out of energy and this type of thing. But then I ended up by saying, I regret a lot of things, but I don't do guilt anymore. And people say that just makes the biggest difference, because if they can regret something, then they don't feel like they are a bad person and they have failed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to talk, let's shift gears here. And I want to talk a little bit about ducks in a row. Accepting mortality. And boy, that is very challenging in our culture.
Yes.
I think being Americans, we think we're invincible.
Yeah.
And it permeates throughout our culture and into our lives and into our families. And then when all of a sudden, and what's inevitable is we're not immortal, we're mortal. And, you know, when you are finally at that place, and it doesn't matter age, because,
no, it doesn't.
Because you could be diagnosed with a newly, chronic illness or a disease of some kind. And then you could be 10 years.
You can be in a car accident.
You can be in a car accident, absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about mortality.
Okay. So I'm sure you have read Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal.
Oh, yeah.
It's
my Bible.
It is mine too. And I just thought the last half
State
of the book.
That title again for our listening audience. This is one of the most foundational books that everybody should be reading.
I couldn't agree more. Being Mortal, Mortal, and it's by Dr. Atul, Atul Gawande, Gawande. And this man is just fabulous, and he really opened up my eyes into how to talk to people who are diagnosed with a terminal illness, and about being open. He has 5 questions that he asks people. And it'll start with what is your understanding of your condition? What are your fears if your condition worsens? What are your goals in the time you have remaining? What are you willing to sacrifice in order to accomplish those goals? And finally, what makes life worth living? And I think those 5 questions are just so important to opening conversations, because I think so many times we are afraid to talk about death. And so, I've had too many situations, family members, who everybody pretended were going to be just fine until they took their last breath. And so, they missed the opportunity to say, I love you, I forgive you, or, whatever they wanted that person to know before they died. And that just, I have just seen how that leaves such a huge gaping hole in a person's heart and soul. And it just that never heals over. So I talk about that, but then I also talk about the nuts and bolts of it, the importance of having a will or a trust, and a durable power of attorney, and most importantly, an advance directive, and where you appoint healthcare representatives and you identify your wishes when it comes to life support and tube feeding. And I've been through, caring for my Aunt Jean, and her being really, really secretive and not sharing her documents with me. And it was on a Sunday morning that the night nurse said to me, Elaine, your aunt may not live. We've got 2 conditions. We've got pneumonia and she's got a heart failure. So, do you have a copy of her advance directive? And she was so secretive, she wouldn't share it with me. Fortunately, I knew her attorney. He was a personal friend. I got a hold of him at home, 7:30 on a Sunday morning, and I got a hold of her advance directive. And if I hadn't, the outcome could have been so horrible, because her heart began to fail at 11 o'clock at night. And, they called and asked me if I wanted to put in a pacemaker. And, at that point, I had the authority to ask, if we do that, will she be able to, go back and live independently? Will she have any quality of life? And I said, no, probably not. She's going to be bedbound for the rest of her life. And so at 3 a.m. she had a stroke, and I had the authority then to make the decision to not keep her breathing, right? And to keep her comfortable and to let her die peacefully. And if I hadn't known the attorney, if I hadn't been able to get my hands on that advance directive, I can't imagine what kind of hell my aunt would have had to go through before she could have been allowed to leave this earth. And, so I talk about that, and I talk about what happens if you don't have a will or a trust, and the importance of getting these things all lined up. And I know these are difficult topics, and I know they're easy things to avoid, but I've just seen too many times, Mark, as I know you have, what happens if people don't get prepared and do what they need to do and have the conversations with the people they care about before they die.
So if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Elaine Sanchez. She's the founder. She's the founder of CaregiverHelp.com, and she has put together a support group through the internet. Am I saying this correct?
Almost. Yep.
Okay. So correct me if I'm just trying to, bring everybody together. And in this support group, you're going to be addressing 10 modules to help caregivers recognize and get the respite that they need to recharge the jets, if you will, refuel, so that you can become, stronger and healthier as a caregiver. Exactly.
And so the my website, CaregiverHelp.com, was it's still in transition because this is a brand new caregiver support group, and my idea is that it will be offered through organizations like area agencies on aging, through church groups, through organizations like yours, Comfort Care, that it can be offered as a facilitated support group. It has my videos, our workbook, Facilitator's Guide. And the thing that makes it different from other support group programs is that it is video-based, and it does not require extensive training for facilitators. I offer training and then quarterly updates on training, but but being video based, it's more entertaining, I think, than most text based programs, which most of them aren't a lot of fun. And
they're too in many cases they're too cerebral.
You're right. That's a great way to describe it. Yeah.
And they don't touch the heart,
right?
And where people are living, and the and the pain that they've in lack of a better word, allowed into their lives, or that they've not been able to manage.
Right.
What comes along with being a caregiver. The emotional stress, the physical stress, the spiritual stress on an individual, and you've got to have an outlet. It's your therapy to the caregivers. It's your gift of therapy, is what you're doing.
Yes, and what I realized, through COVID, a couple of things. One is that people have become much more comfortable with Zoom meetings, and that's one really good thing. And for most caregivers, getting their care receiver settled and safe and then getting to a meeting can be quite a challenge. I mean, that can be half a day effort right there. So this can be conducted in live group settings. It can also be delivered via Zoom, so people can do it that way. And then we're also setting it up so that it can be self-paced. So if they miss a support group meeting, then they can go back and they have the workbook to follow, and they can watch the videos, and they can do this at their own pace. So
how long are the modules each? So like if I start is it sequentially? So if I start out with number 1 all the way down to 10, you want to do them in order, or can you bounce around?
You could bounce around, and I think that the first 6 are the core of the program, and that is developing an attitude of creative indifference, the 3 F's of flipping out, managing your caregiver anger, giving caregiver guilt the boot, and then I'm down and I can't get up, dealing with depression and grief. So those 6 are the foundation of the program, and they can be delivered, I think, depending on how much time you want to allot for discussion and for journaling. Each of those modules can be done in 90-minute sessions, or they can be done in like 2 60-minute sessions. So it's very flexible depending on how you want to deliver it, how much time you have. And then the last 4, which are ducks in a row, and then I have 2 dementia modules. One is on managing triggers and stress and sundowning, and the second one is on surprising and inappropriate dementia-related sexual behavior, and dealing with some of those things. So those, you can either go through all 10, or you could offer those as individual events. I think it all depends on an organization's group and their goals and the time they can allot to a support group. I'm doing this program for WACOG. It's Western Arizona Council of Governments, and we're doing it every other week, starting tomorrow, and it will go through June of 2022. So we're allowing a lot of time for interaction and breaking people into small groups so that they can really talk to one another and support one another, which I think is really important. It's just been my experience that, when you go to a conference, sometimes the best information they take away is what they get from one another, which, is always a little bit of a slap in the face to me as a speaker. But, I know that being able to connect with other caregivers, to know that you are not alone, is really beneficial. Yeah.
And that's your role as a speaker. That's your role as a, facilitator, is to spark the experiences that people have, and every caregiving experience is unique and different. And
it is.
And you're touching on the broad brushstroke principles, and then it's up to them to share their story. And as they share their individual stories with each other, then that's where healing can begin, and sharing of experiences can bring solutions to each other, and all. I mean, it just goes. And you're the instigator. You start the domino, if you will, in motion.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's through connecting with others that I think people really grow, and those conversations help them develop their own plan. They may adapt what I do to something that is, better for them or a little bit different, but it does spark that thinking and the idea that there is a way to control these things that we think are so unmanageable.
Are you planning to, in the future, build upon these 10, and so there'll be 15, 20, 25 modules?
I don't think so. No, I think this is, I'm putting everything I have into this program. And what I may do, and I did for about a year, was little 5-minute videos that I would send out. And I may do this to keep programs going so that, I'll just pick a topic and I'll create a 5-minute video and send that out that people can use as conversation starters for their support groups. But and I may change my mind. I mean, I really thought when we did this last thing in 2018, this was it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not it yet. But yeah, I feel really good about this. I think it's at this point, it's as good as I can possibly do. It's the best I can do, and I think it's pretty darn good.
Well, and you're a pioneer, and you're there isn't a lot of information out there for care. I mean, there's a lot of information, but there's not the support group that at the extent that you've gone with it, that is available to caregivers. And when we're talking caregivers, these are not just professional caregivers, but family caregivers.
Right, exactly.
And there's just not a lot of resources there. So without having to scour the internet, you just come to one site and it's all there. And for those that are listening today, Elaine, share how they can be in touch with you. What's your website? Where do they go? How do they learn more about it? And then what can they do to get started in becoming a part of a support group?
Wonderful. Yes. So my website is CaregivRSupport, HELP.com. And if you are interested, if you want to know more, just click on the Contact Us link and send me an email, and then I can tell you how this works. So if you are a part of a support group and you would like to know more about how you could use my materials for your support group, just go there. If you are an individual caregiver and not part of a support group, then you could click on video courses. And these are not the new updated videos that I have in the support group, but it's the same topics. And I know that thousands of people have found the support they needed there to, as I say, get them through a difficult day or a sleepless night. That you can find some help in short segments, like 10-minute videos, and you can take something away from that and say, okay, good. Well, this can help me right now. So, so my hope, Mark, is that, as I said, this program will actually be released, ready for the public on October the 4th. So I start the first module tomorrow. So we're kind of building the plane as we take off, and I'm so excited about it. I think it's really good.
Yeah, we're all excited about it because it's such an important resource to have for our caregivers. And caregivers are very special people, and they need very special support, or the type of support that can make a difference in their lives so that they can continue to help others live their best life possible.
You are exactly right. Yeah. And,
if I were to put it in a nutshell to all those caregivers that are out there listening, you're not alone. Elaine has said it very well. You're not alone. We here at Aging Today, back up that claim that you're not alone. And I encourage all of our listening audience, our caregivers especially, to get a hold of Elaine and to become a part of a support group that was the ones that she's providing here online. And you can go at your own pace. That's kind of the cool thing about the internet, is that the information there, the resources there, and you can go at your own pace. Did I say that okay?
You did. Yeah, there are actually two ways. If they want to go to my website and go to video courses, that is the course that we updated in 2018, and it is free to caregivers. And if organizations are interested in purchasing the support group package, then they can contact me, and then they can have all of the materials, the facilitator's guide, access to the new videos, and the new updated caregiver workbooks and journals. And so that's different. So that's a paid package that they would offer to their caregivers.
Okay. And this is all going to launch October the 4th. 2021.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, I can't wait for it to be launched, and I hope that all of our listening audience out there will be waiting also as well. And in the meantime, if you want to make contact with Elaine Sanchez, she's the creator, the founder of CaregiverHelp.com, and also the author of Letters from Madeline. Definitely want to pick that book up. It's chock full of humor and experiences from her mom. How she felt as she was going through the aging process.
And caring for my dad. That's right. Well, thank you. You've done a great job of wrapping all of this up, making sense of it. It's big. It's a big project, and it's a lot.
Yeah. And it'll evolve, and then it'll get it's going to get bigger, Elaine. Be ready. That's what happens with life when things go well. And
yes.
You're going to be at the right place at the right time in caring for our caregivers.
I certainly hope so, Mark, because when my mother was going through her experience, it was 1993 through 1999, and there was nothing. Yeah. I mean, we didn't even have the word yet, caregiver, as a word. And, for me, this has been a tribute to her, and sometimes almost an apology, because it's like I didn't know how to help, outside of just calling her and talking to her and going back often to see them. There just weren't resources, and we just didn't know what to do. So I know she would be so honored and humbled to think that her experiences started all of this, and that it's really making a difference for so many caregivers. I know that she would feel like it was all worth it,
Yeah.
as hard as it was.
What a great legacy she left. And it all started with the writing.
It did.
She wrote it down. Yeah.
Yep, she did. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
This has been awesome.
Thank you, Elaine. And then good luck with the launch of CaregiverHelp.com and the support groups that you're going to be providing. We're looking forward to it. I also want to thank our show sponsor, Comfort Care Home Care of West Linn, Oregon. The Comfort Care team at West Linn is devoted to assisting you to live your best life possible. This is Mark Turnbull, your host. Thank you for tuning in to Aging Today, the podcast where together we do explore together the options to aging on your terms. Join us again next week for another lively discussion on Aging Today. And our special guest next week will be David Frost. He's Kaboomer. We're going to be talking about exercise and how much exercise will make a difference in your life as you age. Remember, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.